Hello, we are here tonight to talk about CVI supports for communication and literacy. We're going to have somebody else joining us, we hope, Stephanie, who is at the Perkins, at the Exceptional Education Teacher, and she is at the Ellis Center, and she is actually a CVI specialist. She's supposed to be joining us. We were lucky enough to have her in our group last time, just kind of on a fluke, and we said, hey, you're pulling you in, you're going to be part of this. I am Susan Norwell, the co-founder of Rett University, educational specialist for like 44 some odd years. And Courtney Barnum is here, and she is an educational specialist also with Rett University and helps run also our Rett University, is also a coach and also helps run our Rett University. So that's great. So am I advancing the slides or are you advancing the slides?
I will.
You will. Okay. All right. That means you have to touch your computer, so be ever so careful. All right. So we're trying to put together just some supports that we can try to use to support kids that have either, and we went over this last time, like kind of like the crossover between visual processing issues and CVI. CVI being something that you can actually see on a scan. Visual processing problems not. And so, but what I don't want people to think, and what both Stephanie knows from a much more experiential level than I do, but is that with the right instruction and a good approach, that functional vision can develop. And when we say visual processing or CVI, it's not acuity at all. It's the use of that vision. It's the interpretation of what they are seeing into meaningful information in their brain that is affected. So literacy can be taught, but we need materials that are adapted for CVI. And so I have a book that I put together for a student of mine who has not been formally diagnosed with CVI, but if he doesn't have CVI, then I'm not Susan Norwell. And what I would like to do at this point is maybe you could let me share my screen and I can show the book. And that might give us a little time to see if maybe Stephanie is going to be joining us. Maybe something happened to her. Do you know where she's from?
She lives in Atlanta, and I'm sending her the link right now. It's my fault. I forgot to send the link. Like I said, we're not touching, okay. And we're Courtney and technology are this week.
That's all right. So I'm going to show you this. I'm going to show you this book. And the thing that I've done to help somebody that has visual processing or CVI is I've put these bright kind of pink boxes around the things that I want to draw their attention to, so that if they look at the picture actually lights up. See how it lights up? And if they're using eye gaze, it lights up. And I have eye gaze users that do have CVI. It is possible. But what I was noticing is that even if I put just one word on a page, my kids that have Rett and CVI feel really pressured that they've got to get to that one button. And even though you would think it'd be easier because there's only one button, sometimes they feel a little pressured because that's the button they have to get to. So I started creating books that when they hit it, I could make the button disappear. There's some wonderful features in Communicator that allow things to appear and disappear at once you program it. This is like the extent of my programming abilities. And then they go away. And that amount of movement, just kind of change in the visual scene, tends to draw their attention. And they kind of feel like they're playing a video game. You know, it's butterfly. Let's just shoot the words and go. So. Red. Now, what's interesting is that for many of my kids that do have visual processing problems and or have CVI, they tend to have a very fleeting glance. And these are still set to a minimal dwell, but a dwell that you would use to make sure somebody's actually intentionally trying to get there. And they learn that they have to really hold their eyes longer to get it to disappear. Just grazing over it isn't enough. They've got to hold it to get it to disappear. So I took that a little bit of a step further. Again, there I am highlighting what it is I want to draw their visual attention to. When they look there, then I can kind of give them, hey, Stephanie, yay, it's our fault, so sorry. I'm just going over a book I made, and then we'll go back into the PowerPoint. I was trying to kill a little time and still make good use of it. So
Okay,
if they look there because of the box, I can say, oh, that's the big butterfly. I probably could do an outline in Communicator, but it would be really hard and look really clunky. So I tend not to do that. Just give them a little bit of a box and then talk them through what's there. But the other thing that my kids struggle with is they struggle with tracking. And so what I did here, and again, this should have a green box. Oh, it does. There we go. Is that they can get to that first word. That left to right thing is really hard. And if they get to the first word, it disappears when they look at it. They get to the next word, and then they get to the next word. And the reason I did this to see how it would work with a few of my kids, one who I know has CVI, one that just has visual processing issues. And what I saw was, and there's a movie because they, it's so much nicer when you have a movie thrown in. But what I saw was they got into a bit of a rhythm with following this. So at first it was like, okay, I hit it. And then it was wait. And then it was, oh, wait, I've got this. Now I'm going to get this. And now I'm going to get the next one. And what you started to see is on pages that I didn't set it up this way, where it just was text with hidden buttons so I could see what was lighting up, they got more fluid. And so just a way of kind of playing, again, trying to play with Stephanie's words last week struck me about how movement really helps them reorganize and pay attention. And this isn't exactly movement, but it's like movement because things disappear and appear. It's like, okay, the word was here, and now the word is here, and now the word is there. And I think what it does is it's helping them kind of get that left to right more fluidly. And I had kids that were only looking at the middle of the page. And if you're going to read, you have got to get to the left side. You do. Because you can't start text in the middle of the page and then you run out of room. I mean, it doesn't work that way. You would have to do so many adaptations over time that if we can start to get that left to right going, could be really, really good. So I'm going to get rid of, Courtney, you want to get rid of my screen. That's just like one thing I did to kind of show. There we go. And then put your screen back on. All right, super. Okay. So Stephanie, you put your microphone on, and let's just kind of tag team each other. I think go ahead. So I know that you helped us with this. So why don't you talk a little bit? I kind of covered the first two.
Okay. So definitely, visual complexity is something that impacts all students with CVI, really across the board, no matter how significant their CVI is. And some, when we say complexity, we mean complexity of array. How many items are they looking at one time? Like words, like Susan had up on the screen on Communicator. We're talking about complexity of the sensory environment. How many external auditory noises are happening around the student? What types of tactile sensations are they having to also attend to while also engaging their vision? Also, complexity of faces is very difficult for students with CVI. It's very, very challenging, and really, students with CVI who are in later phases tend to be able to regard faces a lot more easily, but in those earlier phases, it's very difficult for them to regard novel and even semi-familiar faces. And as well as, complexity of an image. Students with CVI have sometimes a very difficult time interpreting abstract cartoon drawings. I mean, think like Bugs Bunny, think line drawings. They just don't look at that and see a rabbit or, see what they're trying to look at. They see a bunch of clutter on a page that may not make any sense to them. So you have to be careful about, the complexity of the environment and the complexity of, what's in front of a student. It's really, really important for students with CVI.
Because I see this a lot, is I see somebody putting a 20 by 20 grid together with all of them with the with symbols that are high contrast. And I think to myself, holy smoly, there's so much busyness on this page that you have just taken the value of the high contrast and kind of thrown it out the window, because a high contrast next to a high contrast next to a high contrast, what it looks like to me, and I have great vision, is just a blur of colors and very overwhelming. Am I right on that? Or am I speaking am I a heretic?
No, not a heretic at all. And that's actually something that's oftentimes discussed by CVI professionals is, I think oftentimes different curriculums, AAC devices, programs will have that high contrast option and kind of market it as CVI adapted. But just because it's high contrast doesn't mean that it's easy to visually interpret. Like for example, some of the, I love Boardmaker, but some of the Boardmaker symbols get very, very complex and these very odd cartoon line drawings that can be very, very difficult for kids with CVI to be able to, especially when they're on a big array where you have, 20, 30, 40 symbols on a page. It can get very, very complex. So, color is definitely something that can be used to support a student with CVI's vision, but it's not the end, just because you do the high contrast doesn't mean they're going to be able to see it any better. It can still look just as abstract and just as complex. So I would say you're right on the money.
And I just want to make sure people understand when we say see, anytime we say see tonight, what we're saying is understand.
Right.
That it's really about understanding what they're seeing. They're seeing, their vision's fine. Typically, their vision's fine. It's just how they interpret what they're seeing. I think your last point is really good. That think about how much vision precedes action.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because when I read that, I went, that's so right. Because schools, first of all, schools do a whole lot. I think they think that kids that are CVI or have visual processing issues are low functioning. Mm-hmm. And so what do? Is they hold up a lot of pictures that they probably can't interpret, mm-hmm. and expect them to point to the one they're asking them for, because that's pretty much what people think is a good thing to do in general. I find it to be boring and awful, but, that's just me. And I'm thinking, gosh, not only are they not interpreting the picture, now they're supposed to point at the one people are asking to, and they how can that happen?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about, just from a developmental perspective, if you think about the development of typical babies, right? How do they decide to get up and crawl across the room? Is because they see mama on the other side of the room, or they see their favorite toy, or they see something really exciting. So visual interpretation and visual processing is so important. A lot of, I think, what we take for granted as typically, sighted people and neurotypical people is that, we have a lot of motivation to be able to use our vision and to be able to move and to be able to take action, whereas a student who is not interpreting things around them may feel pretty isolated and may, kind of respond and appear and have more behaviors more like a blind child who may not reach out and touch things and may not engage and interact with things around them because they're just not interpreting it. And then also, one of the characteristics of cortical visual impairment is that students may not have a visually guided reach. So that means that if they're trying to reach for something, they may not be able to maintain eye contact with the item as they're touching. So they may look away, and then do a little bit of feeling around, and that affects their accuracy. So like Susan said, you hold up all those pictures and they just may not be able to, they may even know what the picture is, but may have a difficult time being able to reach out, touch the ball, while focusing and, visually engaging in it. So it's a very, very difficult, complex task.
It makes kids kind of tricky. All right, we're going to turn the page because we're so organized here. Look, I love these slides. So this was the other piece of it, because I think that I'm always trying to understand why. So some kiddo has a difficult time learning something, or has a difficult time with behavior, or seems more anxious in situations. It's like, why? What's the why behind it? There's no such thing as a bad kid. There are bad adults. I have decided in my life there are bad adults, but that's probably because somebody didn't understand them as a child and help them through their stuff. But kids who act out at a young age, or kids that have meltdown, there's something behind it. And when I read this, I thought this was really helpful, because I think that unfortunately in schools, people are quick to blame versus figure it out. So Stephanie, you can talk about this. This would be great. I can talk about the anxiety with Rett, but I'll let you take the other stuff.
Yeah. Lack of, that interpretation can definitely result in disengagement, frustration, meltdowns. A student, may put their head down, or may look away, or may want to reject whatever activity or whatever thing you're trying to have them engage in, because they simply don't understand what they're looking at and what they're seeing and what they're interacting with. So it doesn't make sense, and it can be very, very fatiguing for students with CVI, and it's something that we call CVI fatigue, because they're having to exert so much energy and thought into being able to interpret the world around them that sometimes they might shut down. And especially if they are not being given the supports to help them to be able to better interpret their environment and their world, it can definitely lead to some frustration and disengagement that may be looked at as, a behavior problem or low cognitive ability, or, lots of other reasons, when it's just simply visual fatigue and complexity.
Yeah. So I have this little girl that I just worked with this morning, so she's fresh in my mind, who I can't say that she's got CVI. I do think she has some visual processing issues, and I think she struggles with visual fatigue, definitely. And she has a rhythm to her that I'm getting over time, where she'll look at something for a certain part of time and do a task for a certain amount of time, and then she looks away. And it's interesting because in my discussions with the school, they're like, she has got a real attending problem. I said, I don't find her to have an attending problem when she's focused and looking. I think what she has is she's got this visual organizational issue that could be a higher level CVI, or it could be just visual processing. But what I have found with my kids that have visual processing issues that also have Rett is you've got this kind of like now two-pronged anxiety-producing educational system that wants you looking at them all the time. So they're saying, look, 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 which when you have apraxia is next to impossible to do on command. And then when you're really not ready to look because you need the time to kind of reorganize visually, I could see where some of our techniques of bringing people back could actually be causing more anxiety and having them look away. And so I think that I have this kind of rule with a lot of my kids who do have CVI, is like, I do anything, and it depends on the kid, but it's like, okay, for this kid, if I do anything for 15 minutes, we are changing activities. Even if it's a visual activity, we are changing it. It's going to look totally different. It's going to ask them to do something totally different, because I would see their data and their ability to do things decrease over time. And it wasn't that they were getting dumber. That is not it. It is that they were getting fatigued and they couldn't do it. And so I think probably there's a lot of points in my career where I was really grateful I had a certain kid come into my practice. And my kiddo that I got that has CP with CVI was really helpful, because it wasn't Rett. It was CVI and CP, which is different than Rett, but it helped me understand it and how much it's even more complex when you put Rett into the mix. So just so that we kind of have that in the back of our minds. And when I do training for these kids, I do it a little bit differently because I think people do need to understand that visual fatigue piece, which I certainly can relate to now that I'm on a screen all day. It's like, that's what we feel like at the end of the day. So do you want to explain this framework maybe so that?
Yeah, for sure. So out of the Pediatric Cortical Visual Impairment Society, there is an assessment that was developed called What's the Complexity Framework? And I will first preface by saying that, I think I have, there's always pros and cons of every assessment. It does, I think at times the assessment can rely a lot on, answering a lot of questions and things where students with apraxia may have a really difficult time being able to kind of answer some of those, make those answers on command. And then also when you get into students with complex communication needs who may not, at certain points have a clear yes or no indication, it may, get a little bit tricky, but it is a recent assessment that was developed to assess a student's frustrational level with what amount of complexity can they handle in 2D images. So really, are they really just needing to be really engaging with pictures of 3D objects on a very simple background? Are they able to handle multicolored pictures with, different, colors and patterns? Are they able to visually regard and interpret, cartoons that are realistic or cartoons that are a little bit more abstract? So it, kind of methodically goes through these different levels of increasing complexity. So that you can evaluate a student at where is their frustrational level so that you can use that to inform their program planning. So it's a good tool overall.
All right, here we go. We're moving. All right, so salient figures or salient features of elements that kids are going to be looking at. I'm going to hand this to you. We're so excited that we met Stephanie because I know a little bit enough to be dangerous, but I know enough to help kids. But I'm always looking for people that know more because then we get to learn. So we are thrilled to have you on board. We're trying to talk her into doing some courses on Rett U for us. So we're really happy. Anyways, go ahead.
So what are salient features? So typically sighted or neurotypical individuals, have all of these different visual schemes in their brains, right? So you think of a spoon, and most of us would be able to come up with a picture in our head of what a spoon looks like. Students with CVI, that is not the case. They do not already have those predetermined schemes in their brain or those visual schemes, those visual memory. They do not have. So that's something that can be a very helpful strategy is using salient features, which are pointing out key characteristics, visual characteristics, specifically visual characteristics of an object or something that you're trying to help them to be able to better look and interpret, pointing out those visual characteristics. So for example, at the bottom, there is this picture of a dog. So some salient features of a dog is that they have a snout, they have 4 paws, and they have a tail. Now, pointing out those salient features to students with CVI can be extremely impactful because it helps fill in the gaps for some of those visual schemes that are not there. And it helps them to be able to create a visual scheme for a dog, for a spoon, for, any number of items and, anything that they would need to look at. And so it can be very, very helpful and a really good strategy and also something to prepare a student for what they're going to be looking for. Letting them know, okay, we're going to have a butterfly on the screen. A butterfly has 2 wings. It has, this part, and going over that with them so that by the time you show it to them, they're already kind of starting to visually process it in their brain, and then they're able to spot it even if there may be some complexity in the environment.
It's almost like a little inside out, because what happens for neurotypical kids is they look at something and point, and then we go into our description.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, that's a doorknob, and that's what we do is to turn the door. And for these kids with these struggles, we almost have to preload the explanation before the visual comes. And I have a mom in England that I'm working with who is so good about doing this with her son. As she turns the page, she's talking about what's going to be there and what's coming. And she says these lovely things like, okay, now when you're ready to look at the picture, what you're going to see is, I mean, she has this just lovely way of like prepping him that I think is just so great. We've talked a lot about it. She just really got it and says it in such a nice way that I should probably put her up here too. I'll just like make her, I'm going to make everybody do my work for me. That's what I've decided. Everybody's going to come and do our webinars. All right, let's turn the page. All right, what are more salient features here?
So, so they are initially used in phase 1 and phase 2 of CVI, so those earlier phases of CVI, but they're also used in later phases for more novel objects, symbols, environments. You can use, as you saw in the picture with the dog, you can use some of those color supports to actually highlight those specific features. And you can use, if a student has a preferred color that's, easier for them to interpret, you can use that color to, point out even more so those salient features. And there is a salient feature dictionary, and the link is at the bottom, which is a really great resource that you can use if I use it all the time with my students. Sometimes I just cannot think of all the salient features for one specific object. And so I'm able to look it up, and it's a dictionary just like any other dictionary, and it'll tell you a list, and you can submit salient features for different objects as well. So it's a nice little resource to use if you are having a brain fog about what the salient features of a lamp are.
So one of the things you talked about was color supports. You made me think a whole lot between the last time we had the webinar and now. And one of the things I teach kids is like, what's the detail from this page? The main idea is we are going to see, butterflies are all different. What was the detail about this page? And what I started doing with the details is even making the boxes that contain the two details different colors so that they would see this is different from this is different. And I thought, why didn't I not think about that sooner? I don't know. But it just got my brain turning that if we can give them anything to hang on, anything that would make it easier for them to discriminate between the two, that would be helpful. And sure enough, and I think I'm just putting it in all my books that I make, because I always feel if I can make it work for the child that is the most complex, how much easier will it be for the child that's not as complex? Do I really want them using all of their energy to visually figure out things? I'd like them thinking a little bit more if that were possible. So it's a kind of a cool thing. That was really helpful. All right. I probably should be turning the page, or you could turn the page, Courtney.
I am turning the page. It's turned.
Did you just turn the page? Oh, you're already ahead of me. Oh, this bubbling tool. I think this is really cool. All right. So you talk about the bubbling tool. I love this.
Yeah, so similar to using color and, to kind of outline different features of different visual objects, you can also use, this kind of color marking to also use with words and with letters. And this bubbling tool is, so my school for years, what we were doing was printing out regular, words and then taking markers and manually highlighting around the entire word for every word and letter we were using. And it's extremely time consuming and not fun. So this word bubbling tool thankfully came out.
It's like back in the day when we used to have to use a book of Mayor Johnson's symbols and take them one at a time and Xerox them and then make them into a grid. And then, oh my gosh, I mean, it's like when it became computerized, your whole life changed.
Yeah, it was similar. So the Roman word tool is used if you are, if a student is having trouble visually engaging and interpreting a word, Sometimes it helps that you also bubble that word, and then you can talk about the salient features of that word or that letter, and point out to them, okay, the letter B is tall on the left side, and then it goes round on the right, and talk about the visual features. And this bubbling tool will enable you to have those beautiful crisp lines around the word, so that the student may be able to better visually look at. And then also what I love about this tool is you can also take the word out of the shape and do some activities where just you're making sure if a kid is visually discriminating between words, and you can have them, if they need to like match the word into the shape. So if they're visually discriminating. And also what I like about it is that it has a way that you can thin out the line, the bubble line, so that, eventually the student may not need, you can fade it and fade it and fade it over time. So that eventually you don't have this chunky bubble over a word, and it's just like a very thin, line, and that you could eventually fade away once they're highly familiar with that word or that letter. So it's a great tool.
Oh, there we are. The radio parent. That's the way to talk about it. It's like being able to, and not too many people are, not everybody's comfortable with this, I think. What strikes me about when I go into classrooms is how much people talk with no reference to anything visual. They just talk, just talk. I just did an observation of one of my kids who's just a pretty medium functioning kid with autism. He's got some language, he's got some reading, and I sat in on his history class and I was appalled because I thought any LD kid in his right mind would not understand, 80% of what is going on here. And my guy, who's got an auditory processing problem you could drive a truck through, is just like lost. But if you go into most classrooms, there is a lot of talking and not a lot of visual support. The other thing is that people hold up images without a lot of explanation. Even for kids who have neurotypical vision, some images need to be explained because they might be outside their experience. They might look different than what they have at home. There's so many complexities to reading a story to children that if they do it in a fast rate, they're really missing out on a lot. The idea of this anticipatory language is really important too. This is like this mom saying, when you're ready to look at it, you're going to see blah, 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 blah. Is such a way of nicely getting the visual attention there, nicely setting an expectation you would like the child to look, but also give them something to hang on to. What can I expect is really a good thing. Now, in Rett, that's huge because there's already a lot of anxiety with anything new. And so now we're giving this anticipatory language that is so helpful, not only for vision, but for anxiety and for just plain understanding. Just for kids who are more concrete, I'm not going to say everybody in the world has just got a vision problem. There's no cognitive implications of that. That would be unfair. So you combine some of those things, like some of my kids who have CP and their CVI and they have a cognitive issue, being able to kind of warn them in advance of what's coming also sets the stage for them cognitively as well as visually. So, and that wait time cannot be, I don't know how often I teach wait time. Sometimes like 20, 25 seconds. We're talking not just your normal, okay, we're going to give you a couple of seconds and move on. And I think the reason wait time, at least for me, is important is if we don't wait, then we teach them they cannot. If we don't wait, we build a culture, we build a bubble around them that says either A, you're not worth waiting for, or B, you can't get to it, or C, don't ever work hard enough to get to it because we're already past it. It like breeds learned helplessness, and I think it makes kids feel less. And so I think actually if you take everything that I do, that the phrase, I'll wait for you, might be the most powerful thing I say to kids, I would say. So anyways, and then all these strategies can be embedded throughout the day. So that's good. So do you want, these are your websites, honey. So Stephanie, you should be.
Oh, yeah.
No?
Yeah, so this is a list of just information. All of this is free resources. The bubbling tool at the top. Paths to Literacy is a great website resource for students with visual impairments of all kinds. CVI Scotland's also really great. There's lots of great resources out there. So yeah.
And I do like seeing Rett University in the bubbles. We do have our 4-grid communication board, the soft tech done in high contrast. But there's like a like, a not like, a help, and a feelings. Yeah. Then you open and you see, if you say like, then you've got 4 options. If you don't want those 4, there's another 4 on the back of it. It's really trimmed down, but I think that what happened is we made it regular and then we made it high contrast for some people who had requested high contrast, and then all we sold was the high contrast. We just stopped making the other because it just was so much easier for everybody to process that's what ended up happening. But I love that bubble tool. Are there more slides here? There are. Look at that. If you have questions, you can email me or you can email Courtney. And we want to say kudos, thank you to Stephanie, because she gave us great resources and great input and was an absolute wonderful member of this panel that we're trying to put together. And if you have questions for Stephanie, we are happy to field those and send them to her. We're not going to give out her email to inundate her, but if you have specific questions for her, other than, why aren't you teaching on Rett U, which we've already asked, so let's not try to bombard her with that. But I don't know if any of you as parents have any questions for us right now that we could take, or else we will say good night. So you do have to kind of either say yes or no, maybe. Well, people are very shy. They don't want to have their cameras on. So I'm going to say that you probably don't have any questions. Were there any questions in the chat? It really helps us then know things that are working or not working or problem solved. So thank you all for being here. We are always grateful at Rett University that we can help our families. And I just want to say a big thank you to Stephanie because she is helping us help our families. We're going to pull her into the Rett U family and she won't even know she's gotten in there. We're like tugging her by her coat string. So anyways, we are thrilled to have you, Stephanie. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Well, in certain places, stay warm. Like if you're living anywhere near me, we're 15 inches of snow and it's going to be negative 30 on Monday. So we're just batting down. And then you're in Florida, Marian. It's really nice in Florida. And just a bit. You're in Atlanta. Are you in Atlanta?
Me?
Stephanie? Yeah. You're in Atlanta. Yeah. So my friends in Dallas just told me it's going to be only 3 degrees in Dallas. They have ice and tremendous accidents everywhere because nobody knows how to drive on ice in Dallas, it would appear. So yes, very, very. So everybody stay healthy, stay warm or cool, depending on where you are. And we'll see you the next time. All right. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.